Okay, hey everyone, welcome. So this is a facilitated discussion session. So we have a little bit of presentation mixed in with some discussion. Seems like we don't have a huge number of participants, so maybe we can just kind of go at it as a group instead of splitting up into smaller groups and things like that.
Okay, hi everyone. So Kara will get us started in just a second. But before we get going, I just wanted to make sure I'm sharing my screen here. So does that look good to everybody?
For me, Erin, it's white. It just says that you're starting to share content.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, it popped up.
Yes. Okay, excellent. All right, then do you want to take it away, Kara?
Sure, yeah. So welcome to our session. We're talking about this idea of the leaky pipeline and how we've integrated DEI teaching principles into our Biology 1002 classroom. I'm Caralie Brewer. I was a teaching apprentice for Biology 1002 with Erin this semester. And before we get started, we'd just like to acknowledge that the land on which we're gathered is in traditional Mi'kmaq territory, and acknowledge with respect the diverse histories of the Mi'kmaq, Innu, Inuit, and Beothuk cultures. So go ahead, next slide, please. Just to give you an idea of how this will look, we'll start out talking about our situation and how we had a little bit of a unique situation with the apprenticeship. And then we'll go into a little bit of a background on the leaky pipeline effect and why it's so important to be doing this work. And then we'll transition into 3 different strategies we use to integrate DEI teaching principles into our classroom. In each of these strategies, we'll incorporate a discussion question where we kind of like talk about something related to that topic. Next slide.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kara, for getting us started. So I'll just take a moment as we're getting going to tell you a little bit about the situation that has led to Kara and I giving this presentation. So I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Erin Fraser. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a faculty member in environmental science at the Grenfell campus, and a lot of my teaching load is involves teaching some of our introductory biology courses. So I was really excited this year because Kara, who is a master's student in our Boreal Ecosystems and Agricultural Sciences program, approached me because she took the TSEP program and was wanting to do the teaching apprentice part of that program. So she approached me and asked if she could do her teaching apprenticeship alongside me in teaching this course. And so the teaching apprentice program, it's pretty flexible. The students are required to do some teaching on their own and to get some feedback on that, but they also have the latitude to engage in lots of other different teaching related activities. So when Kara and I met to discuss this, we agreed that a really exciting thing that we could do as her being in this teaching apprenticeship would be to explicitly try to make changes to the course to make it more inclusive. And there are lots of ways and lots of places that a traditional introductory biology course can be made more inclusive, and we'll talk more about those as the session progresses. So it was wonderful to have Kara on board and to be involved in this exciting work. And I think we both just really wanted to be very clear from the outset in leading this discussion that neither of us feel that we are experts in this, in making classrooms more inclusive. We're learning every day. So we really weren't feeling like this was a session where we were wanting to lecture to you. We really just want to show you some of the learning that we've done. We found a number of different examples and resources that we found to be really helpful that we thought you might find helpful too. But we have built in lots of opportunities for discussion because we're hoping we can learn from you as well. With respect to the resources that we have used, I don't know about you, I find whenever I go to these kinds of teaching sessions, I always really love it if I can leave with lots of concrete ideas and resources that I can access later and use. So with that in mind, and because so much of what we were doing this year was exploratory and trying to find resources, we're going to show you the resources that we used, and then we've also summarized them all in a list that will be available to you. And Heather, maybe you could comment on the best way for folks to access that list if they want it. Darcy said he would, I think, put it on the Brightspace webpage.
Yeah, all you'd have to do is we'd make it available in the Brightspace.
I'll just
So
comment
is it-
really quickly. I checked
go
and
ahead.
it's on there. So if you click the
Okay.
description of our session, it has our abstract, and then underneath that, there's a link to a Google document that's publicly available that you can click, and it has all of the different resources on it.
Great, thanks for looking into that, Kara. And I guess just to or just to give you a little bit of context before we really get launched here. Our introductory biology course at the Grenfell campus, it's one of our larger classes, and we have smaller classrooms on this campus than in St. John's. And so this was a class that was taught completely remotely for the duration of this term. It was done so in a largely asynchronous fashion, where students worked through modules that were released on a weekly basis, but also had the opportunity for live active learning sessions every week. So that's the format with which we were working this semester. Okay, so do you want to take it away, Kara?
Definitely. So I'm just going to briefly go over some background about the leaky pipeline effect, which is this idea that we're seeing disproportionate loss of students who identify as minorities in STEM fields throughout their entire career, beginning in grade school. And a really great resource is a peer-reviewed book that came out called Talking About Leaving Revisited, that talks about all the different reasons why students are leaving these STEM fields. And this table is from that book. And one really interesting thing is that in my reading, I noticed that biology and the life sciences tend to be among the highest, tend to see among the highest rates of students leaving. So Erin, if you could just click. So here in this study, oh, that's okay. In this study, we see biology is second to only mathematics, biology and life sciences. So there's something going on in our classrooms that really are creating this maybe less inclusive environment than we'd like it to be. Next slide. And before I get started on this slide, I want to acknowledge that the terminology that's being used here is not the most inclusive, and it could be seen as a microaggression. So when you're doing this kind of work, you really want to make sure that you're using the correct terminology, because it's really important and you have the right intention. So it's best if that intention is reflected in your terminology. But I like these tables because they really do show you that these students who identify as minorities, so women compared to men and these different races compared to white, we're seeing a higher rate of students switching out of these STEM fields compared to the majority. So something's going on here in biology and life sciences where we're getting more students switching out than some of the other fields. And something's going on here with these students who identify as minorities, where we're seeing them switch out at higher rates than the majorities. Next slide. And then something really fascinating is that they monitored across 7 universities throughout their whole career students that are switching out of these fields. And they saw that the majority of students are switching out in their first 2 years of their university career. And in those 2 years, that's when they're taking these introductory courses. So that's why it's so important that when we're teaching these really content-heavy courses, we're making sure that we're doing our best to create the most inclusive atmosphere that we can, because we're seeing that these students who identify as minorities are getting targeted and dropping out in these first 2 years. And something that I just want to add is that we're talking about biology. When we talk about biology, it really does relate to humans in a very concrete way. So it's important that we teach these concepts that are really relating to our students in a way that's both accurate but also inclusive, because we're really talking about our students when we're talking about these concepts. Okay, next slide.
Okay, so we'll now segue into what will make up the format or structure of the rest of this presentation, where we're going to talk about each of 3 different initiatives that we took on with the goal of making this course more inclusive, and we'll just be talking about each of these in turn and then having an associated discussion. So the first initiative that we took on was trying to make some modifications to the course syllabus to make the document itself more inclusive. And we felt this was a really important thing to do, because really the syllabus, it's one of the first things that students have when they come to a class. It's the thing they get to take home and spend some time studying, and it's the contract among the members of the class about how things are going to be and what is going to happen. So it is a real opportunity to set the tone in a way that can endure throughout the term. And so to modify the syllabus, we used a few different resources. The one that really was incredibly helpful, and I just want to point out to you, is this extraordinary toolkit that the Faculty of Science at Carleton University has released. And this initiative was led by Dr. Martha Mulally. And it is this interactive, with resources, freely available resource that can actually, if you look on the right here, can actually take you through every step of designing and offering your course, and gives all sorts of suggestions for how to make your course more inclusive. And so you could use this for lots of different things. We really focused on the course outline part. So that was really helpful. And also I've done some programming with the online toolkit faculty development company that also provided some really great suggestions. So just to give you an idea of some of the things that we learned from these resources and were able to incorporate, this is the first couple of pages from our course syllabus, and some changes that I made from previous iterations of this syllabus. We have our land acknowledgement like absolutely at the beginning of the syllabus, so we can really highlight how important that is. We took the time in introducing the instructor team to tell students how we like to be addressed, like what is the appropriate way to call us, which for a lot of students who maybe don't have a lot of university experience, that can be a barrier to talking to the instructor team if you don't know what to call them. We made sure that we had everybody's pronouns in there if they were comfortable doing that. We included a specific inclusive teaching statement in the syllabus that talked about the environment that we were hoping to foster within that learning environment, and also told students that there would be the opportunity to give feedback over the course of the term about how that was going. I learned how to make these really cool infograms that I'm very excited about, that just provide kind of like a neat way to get some of the key information across to the students that hopefully will be something that they're more inclined to read and really take on board. And just for your own interest, the software to do this is a software package called Canva. That is, it is licensed. You do have to pay for it, but I made this whole thing using just the free options. Like there's kind of like a Canva Lite, so you can use this pretty effectively without paying any money. And in terms of the course structure, which is not so much what we're talking about right now, we're talking about modifying the syllabus to be an inclusive document, but you know, one thing I did just want to mention about the course structure is we, to the best of our ability within a course that does have a pretty fixed marking scheme with a large summative assessment at the end, we did try to incorporate some flexibility in the marking scheme for some of the smaller quizzes and assignments, which is another tip that came out of that toolkit for inclusive teaching. So these are just a few changes that we made to our syllabus. And so we wanted to flip to the discussion part now of this session by putting the question to you, is what other recommendations do you have as a course instructors for structuring your syllabus in an inclusive way? And or what are other ways that you can signal inclusivity at the beginning of the semester when you're just starting to teach a course? And so if you want to put your ideas or thoughts into the chat, that would be great. You're also welcome to talk into your microphone if you'd like. I can't see the chat because I'm sharing my screen, so Kara, maybe you could facilitate the discussion.
Yeah, sounds great. So I'm not seeing typing yet. Oh, here we go. So Karen Duty says, I think resources for students, Indigenous Student Center, International Student Society, CPS, etc. That's a great idea, yeah. I think, Erin, did you incorporate something like that into your syllabus as well?
We do have links to some different, some of the different facilities at Grenfell, yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Here we go. We have Erica. I trimmed down my syllabus a lot and have moved to a graphical syllabus format to make it easier for students to refer to and take in. I think that's incredible. Yeah, and that's along those lines of that infographic that Erin, you had on your syllabus, but taken to a next level, which I think is a really great idea.
That's really cool, Erica. If you would ever be willing to share that, I would love to see it.
Sure, yeah, there's a link on the CITL webpage. I'll look for it and I'll post it here. But yeah, it's like your infographic there. Yeah.
Awesome. And
Kind
Karen
of
says that was
scratches. I was going to say, it kind of scratches an itch for us scientists to get to do some. I really enjoyed the artsy craftsy like side of that as well.
Totally, yeah, no, that I was a little nervous about it. I don't feel like I'm really, oh, there's the link. I don't feel like I'm really graphically inclined. But what really got me on board was being able to code it in ticks and LaTeX. And I was like, okay, this I can do. Coding I can
Nice,
do.
nice.
yeah, it's almost like the transition from STEM to STEAM. You're really incorporating that art part of STEM or STEAM.
I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, it's steaming myself. That's awesome.
Melanie posted a link to instructional resources for a graphic syllabus. And Carolyn says, sorry, I'm not connected to a mic. I also give the land acknowledgement verbally in the first class and tell students why I do this. I also talk about the limitations of the specific knowledge that we are going to engage with. That's awesome. Brian says, hello, Caralie and Erin. Thank you for the presentation and the research. Very helpful. There are a few questions arising from the data that would help me refine my course syllabi and content. For example, what are the common denominators among the students from all backgrounds who switch out of the analyzed programs? Brian, the book that I mentioned talking about Leaving Revisited, that's on the handout that we have available. And I would encourage you to take a look at that because there are a number of reasons that they list for the students. And I think one thing that I found interesting was that a lot of students who identify as racial minorities were the reasons why they seemed to think that they were switching out of these STEM fields had more to do with their familial background, like their families maybe were encouraging them to start in a field, or maybe they didn't have any as much support to kind of give them an idea of what these fields were, kind of like thinking one thing and then they get into it and it's different. And also, a number of these students don't have the kind of education that students of traditionally privileged backgrounds would in their grade school and high school days. So those students come in in a much in a much less privileged place and tend to need more help from instructors. And in these introductory courses where things go so quickly, they don't get the help that they need and they end up falling behind and then switching out. So I'm not sure if there's a common denominator among all students. I think that they really tended to focus on the differences that they were seeing between the different minorities. But I would definitely encourage you to take a look at that book.
And Kara, I'm going to suggest that we move along just in I know we have our very strict schedule that we arranged, so
Yeah.
we want to stay on track.
Perfect. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
and we are seeing lots more great suggestions in the chat as well.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you everyone for being so active during this whole process. So we'll move on and talk about our second strategy, and then hopefully we'll keep having these amazing discussions. So another strategy that we used for creating a more inclusive classroom was this idea of creating these scientist spotlights of scientists who identify with these minority groups. So these scientist spotlights are really just, they're not even a required part of the course, but they're really just like little sprinklings of diversity that we've incorporated throughout the course, so that students could, if they felt like they wanted to learn more, could click the link and watch a TED Talk or a YouTube video created by one of these scientists, or a documentary about one of these scientists, to really just give them an idea of what scientists look like on a day-to-day basis, and allow them to relate more to who they are. And there's evidence that these increase retention and really facilitate a sense of belonging. And I think these are really important because in biology 1001 and 1002, a lot of the examples that our students see are these old white men like Gregor Mendel, Charles Darwin, and Watson and Crick, where this isn't necessarily representative of all the scientists who have done such great work in our daily life. Okay, next slide. So two studies that I looked at that incorporated scientist spotlights really did show that although they're a small way to incorporate diversity into your classroom, they really do have a lasting impact on the student's experience. So the Shinsky paper, they kind of did a mirrored study between two courses, one which had the scientist spotlight and one which didn't. And they saw that students that were able to learn alongside these scientist spotlights tended to use fewer stereotypes, like you see on the right, a scientist as an old white guy in a lab coat hunching over a beaker with a cigar or whatever. And so after they watch all these scientist spotlights, they realize that there's no one type of scientist, and a scientist could be anyone. And they also see that students that had access to these scientist spotlights tended to do better, to perform better in the course, because they were just getting more stimulated with these ideas and seeing its context outside of a textbook. So yeah, they really do make a difference. And I think that it's small, but it's really important. So Erin, if you could go to the next slide. A couple of examples that we incorporated into Biology 1002. Some of them are more obvious, like Rosalind Franklin and Barbara McClintock. The left side and on the row of 3, the lower left is Barbara McClintock. But then others were some really fascinating individuals that we incorporated information about, like Pamela Ronald, who's a plant geneticist doing GMO work to help solve the global food insecurity crisis. She's on the upper left. In the middle, Raven Baxter, who's a microbiologist and science communicator that has some really great ways of communicating these concepts. And Jennifer Doudna, who's on the far upper right, she helped create CRISPR. In the middle, on the bottom, the Spirit Bear Research Foundation is an incredible Indigenous-led research group who's doing work to work on wildlife in BC, including spirit bears. And so we included a peer-reviewed paper that they published about the rate of the mutation of this spirit bear allele in the population. And then on the bottom right, we see Tsuniko and Reiji Okazaki, who discovered Okazaki fragments. So some really great ways to just really, sprinkle in that diversity so that your students are able to get this context outside of the course materials. Next slide. So with that, do any of you have examples of scientists that kind of shatter these stereotypes, or can you think of other ways that we can humanize scientists and promote this relatability in our students? Okay, Karen says, I think about Ruth Ella Moore in microbiology, first Black woman in US to receive PhD in natural science bacteriology, worked on microbiome, dental caries, etc. Wow, really cool. I need a pen to write these examples down. And honestly, a lot of these examples that we incorporated were the product of me Googling until I found someone that I thought did something really cool. Erica says, oh, I lost it. I have found the hashtag Black and STEM hashtag really useful to find folks on Twitter. Yes, I love that hashtag. Also, Professor Esther Miriam Zimmer Laderberg discovered lambdaphage. Ooh, very cool.
Until lambdaphage came up in our class. Yeah.
Yeah. Carolyn says Dr. Roberta Bondar, our own Canadian astronaut physician and researcher. Very cool.
This is great, Kara. I'm seeing you taking notes, and I'm thinking maybe we could update our Word document handout and maybe ask Darcy or Heather to put an updated version up there after this session so we can incorporate some of this.
Yeah, that would be great. Oh, Erica says your handout is awesome. I'm glad you like it. Okay, well, maybe we should move on and finish out with the last part of the last
Sure.
strategy.
All right, so I'm going to be talking about the last strategy that we really were mindfully working on this semester. And I will say that as the primary instructor for this course, I feel this is very much a work in progress for me. So some steps this semester, but I hope to just keep making steps going forward. So for those of you who are familiar with introductory biology curricula, I'm sure you know and can think of lots of places where the traditional content and the way that it is presented can be made more inclusive. So today what I really wanted to talk about was one particular element of that, which was an effort that Kara and I made to use more gender inclusive language and examples in this course. And the reason that we really focused on this this semester is that this is, I think, just it's really critical in introductory biology because so many of the concepts that students learn about when they're first learning about biology are about genetics, inheritance, and sexual reproduction. That makes up a tremendous amount of the course. And there is the real potential, certainly in traditional biology classrooms, this is how I learned it, there is a lot of potential to conflate concepts about sex and gender. So in some of the resources that we read, the terminology that I came across was that in teaching biology, we need to really think about separating the sperm-egg dichotomy from gender identity. So to kind of give some concrete examples of that, in traditional biology classrooms, it would be very common to refer or to use the words like female, mother, maternal as adjectives to describe everything from types of hormones to people who have a uterus, to individuals that produce eggs, to individuals with specific sex chromosome karyotypes. And so we can see right away that that's incredibly not gender inclusive. And a lot of the examples that get used in discussions about genetics tend to be really heteronormative as well. So talking about reproduction between a man and a woman, where the assumption is it is a cis man and a cis woman reproducing. And so there's a lot of work to be done here, starting by just really wrapping your mind around all of the implications of this and thinking about what better choices exist. And so the resources that we found to be really, really helpful in this, I just wanted to point out, because all three of them, I think, are just really good touchstone resources. So this paper by Karen Hales talks about inclusivity, not just using gender inclusive language, but in a number of other areas as well. And is just, I think, a must read, like a lot of really good tangible tips in there. This organization and website is actually, it's called Gender Inclusive Biology, and it is spearheaded by Sam Long, who is a biology high school teacher in Colorado, and also has amazing resources and tips. And really also one of my favorite resources right now is this project. It's an NSF funded project called Project Biodiversify. And the whole goal of this website and this organization is to make inclusive examples and resources available to biology instructors. And there are kind of two parts to this. So one part is to actually, they are always soliciting from interested biologists from a diversity of backgrounds for people to make materials that they will put on this website that are available, and to also sort of spotlight themselves. So so there are examples from a wide diversity of biologists that are available for free use from this website. And there also is a whole big section on this website about teaching methods for teaching concepts of sex and thinking about gender in teaching a lot of these introductory biology concepts. So this is also just a gold mine. And really their main message is that they're trying to provide materials that can allow us to teach in a way that is accurate, which a lot of these more traditional methods were not, and inclusive of all humans, but also inclusive of life on Earth, because a lot of what we learn about in introductory biology can be very human-centric, which is really just a tiny piece of the pie. So what are some of the take-home messages that came from going through these resources? Both the Hales paper and the Gender Inclusive Biology website have these tables, which you don't need to worry about reading all the details right now, but I found these so helpful. In both cases, they list the terms that would be traditionally used in a biology classroom, and then give sort of a framework for thinking about how to do better, and then some specific examples. So I mentioned that often words like female, male, woman, man, mother, father are used in ways that carry a lot of assumptions. And so the Gender Inclusive Biology resource really advocates that instructors think about what are they specifically talking about, and then focus on that. So are we talking about an organ, an activity, a role? And so then we can reframe our classes to, instead of saying women produce eggs, to say, well, actually ovaries produce eggs. Or we can talk about people with different sex chromosome karyotypes according to what their sex chromosomes are, because that is really what is the relevant information in a first year biology class. There is a lot of discussion in the Hales paper about the idea of mother and father, and how there's a lot to think about in using those terms. They have a lot of cultural significance. In that paper, they recommend referring to the parent that produces the egg as the egg parent, the parent that produces sperm as the sperm parent. And I tried to do this this semester and found it to be very effective. So these are some examples of language changes that we can make, but of course, beyond language, we can also think about the actual content that we're covering, which is, again, it's a huge job. A couple of examples that emerged that I really liked. So on the left, this again comes from that Hales paper. In introductory biology, we do a lot of pedigree analysis, so thinking about inheritance of different traits from one generation to the next. And this is really important, both for understanding biological concepts, but also practically, like thinking about inheritance of genetic diseases, for example. And these tend to be both very heteronormative and also assuming that all of the individuals in the pedigree are cisgendered. And so the Hales paper gives some examples of pedigrees that are more inclusive, and suggests some strategies for making these yourself as an instructor. On the Project Biodiversify website, there's an amazing resource talking about how we present the idea of sexual reproduction to students, because sexual reproduction really is it's very fundamental to so much in introductory biology. And they make the really good point that so often we are talking about this sperm-egg dichotomy when we talk about sexual reproduction. And that is often something students can really easily wrap their mind around, but it's actually not very inclusive within the world of living organisms. So organisms that have vastly different sized gametes are referred to as anisogamous. But there are many organisms in the world that are isogamous, which means that they have gametes that are similarly sized, and there can just be different reproductive types that are able to engage in sexual reproduction. And there can be not just two types, there can be many types. And so in presenting this information sort of in a way that's more inclusive of life on Earth, we can also start to take the emphasis away from really just like two sexes, two genders, sperm and egg. And I think it just gives us a better understanding of biological principles. So lots to think about here. I'm enjoying learning about it, and certainly acknowledge that there's still lots to do. So I'll wrap up on that for now. And ask you a discussion question, which is, what are some other examples of inclusive language or content that can be incorporated into the science classroom? And we've said science here just because we know that not everybody is necessarily a biologist.
I've got my pen at the ready. I can't wait to
say,
hear
whoa,
what
I
you
put them
guys
all to
say.
sleep.
Okay, Brian says, when I encourage, oh, this was from before. Sorry, Brian. Okay, Carolyn says, these resources are applicable well beyond intro biology and are important for many areas of life sciences, including psychology, my area, biochem, etc., and even beyond. Thank you.
Okay, that's great to hear.
Cheryl says, I've switched to using caregiver when discussing development rather than mother/father. That's a great switch.
Mhm. We can move along, Kara, if we're not getting a lot of
Yeah, I think
comments
this
on
is
this, then I think,
something that takes a, oh, we got one more. Erica says, I use they, them pronouns now. I used to use she in examples because I'm in a male dominated field, but I realize that is not as inclusive. Yeah, I feel like this is kind of a trap for feminists, is a lot of the time we want to use those like she, her pronouns, but so much of this is hard when really what we need to do is be inclusive of all of these other identities that have suffered in the same ways that women have suffered historically. Yeah, Erica says, I mean, not for myself, but for examples. Yeah. Okay, sounds good. Charlene says, yes, it is an evolution. Yeah, definitely an evolution. I think this topic definitely takes a bit of time to wrap your mind around too. So I can understand if people don't have something right off the top of their head that they think they can provide in this conversation.
I agree. And I think I also just maybe want to take a moment to say, because I think we're doing okay with time. So this was really the first year, like I was the primary lecturer for a lot of the material this semester that talked about sexual reproduction. And I found it really took a lot of thinking, like careful thought and careful planning, and thinking about how, what are the learning outcomes, and how have we described this in the past, and what terms do we want to use now that are better. Like it really required a lot of thought. So I guess that's just, and I feel like I messed up quite a bit, is the other thing. So I guess I just want to put that out there, because if it feels intimidating, I certainly found it to be intimidating, and lots of potential to make mistakes. And I guess we're just putting one foot in front of the other and trying to make progress.
And one thing that I think was really unique about our situation and really nice was that Erin and I had a lot of conversations around this, like talking through all of it before she made the materials. And then I got a little bit behind. I'm still going through the materials to give her notes on all of it. Like we really were incredibly lucky to have this situation where we were putting two minds together to kind of like feel our way through this change. And I think that's something that's really valuable for all of you as well, to like really lean on your supports, lean on your coworkers who are doing this kind of thing as well, because those conversations are really, I think, what's going to get you through this transition.
All right, shall I switch us to our final slide?
Yeah. So just to wrap things up, we've talked about why it's so important to change all of these ways of thinking so that we create a more diverse teaching and learning environment, especially in these introductory courses where we're seeing this disproportionate effect on students who identify as minorities. And the ways that we did this were through making a more inclusive syllabus, using the scientist spotlights to kind of like give our students a sense of the diversity that's in the field, and changing the language and content to be more inclusive. And these are just 3 examples, but there are a number of ways that you could make changes to be more inclusive. This is what we felt we could do in the time that we had, but I'm sure all of you have tons of ideas that are, spinning around in your brain, and we'd love to hear them if you have any other ideas or ways to create a more inclusive classroom. Erica says a little, before we moved on to this slide, I think, as a grad student, how did you balance this with everything else? I guess your supervisor was supportive. Yeah, I have a very wonderful supervisor who really, Erin was great. She allowed me to take charge when I felt like I could and step back when I felt like I couldn't. And that was really wonderful. And also was just very understanding when other things got in the way. Like I'm still going through the materials to give her notes, and she's not pressing me to get those notes. She's giving me the time to work through it, which is really wonderful. It was challenging though. Like I taught for the first time, I made some instructional videos and materials. And I cannot tell you how many times my roommates probably heard me rehearsing those materials, and they needed to be thanked with a million cookies in return for listening to all of that. So it was a challenge, but it was definitely doable with the right supports.
But one thing I think what was kind of, this is a good point, Erica, and I know Melanie yeah, she's still here. So I am Kara's research supervisor, as well as I was her teaching mentor in this position. So like it was very easy for us to talk about the balance of her work, and what she wanted to be doing and needed to be doing. But I can imagine that if you had one research supervisor and another teaching mentor, it would require a little bit more work and communication. And so I don't know, Melanie, who runs the teaching apprentice position or program, is here. And I don't know, Melanie, we're maybe getting a little bit on a tangent here, but I wonder, do you have tips that you give the students who do this to help them to navigate all of their different responsibilities?
Sure, I don't mind chiming in for a second. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm home with a sick toddler today, so I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
want to turn my camera on because it's a bit of a disheveled mess here.
That's okay.
Yeah, we a lot of students, for various reasons, are not able to work with their research supervisors. So one of the main considerations we encourage them is to discuss it with their supervisor early on if they're not, using their supervisor as a mentor. We've gone down the road before where supervisors are not kind of aware that they're taking this on, and then that becomes a challenge trying to balance the load. So transparency, I think, is really the main importance. And just setting clear expectations around what they're reasonably able to accomplish, planning early on, reasonable goal setting, which I think you and Kara did really well. It sounds like from the beginning. So mostly being upfront, I think, with everyone involved, both the teaching mentor, the research supervisor, and anyone else who may be kind of helping support the student along that path.
Great. Thanks, Melanie.
No problem.
And I'm seeing a few things are coming in the chat, Kara.
Yeah, so we have, Karen says, I've been more aware lately of images I'm using, for example, stock images to reflect diversity. Yeah, I think that's really important. I think one thing that you want to be sure that you're not doing is that trap of like including stock images that spotlight diversity and then like not incorporating diversity in other ways, because that can be seen as like, what's the term? Just like that can be seen as not reflecting, like not getting to the heart of the problem, I guess.
Karen, this is so I recently learned, and now the title is escaping me, but I recently learned that there is a free resource online of stock images that deliberately has curated a selection of images to reflect a more diverse population. And if I can try to dig through my notes and maybe we could put it on our handout, or do you know, is that what you're using, or where are you getting your images?
Oh, wow. Okay. Sorry, I'm a little behind in the chat. Karen says that, and I realized that the images didn't reflect my classroom. And then in because of the recent, okay. Stacy said, Karen, is it because of the recent artist that shared medical pregnancy illustrations featuring Black people? It's sad. It was so shocking to see non-Caucasian people depicted. And Karen said in response to that, and I realized that the images didn't reflect my classroom. Karen says, we're probably talking about the same thing. I don't have it off the top of my head. That and a lot of digging.
Oh, a lot of digging, yeah.
Oh, Melanie says tokenism. Yes, that's the term that I was looking for. And then Stacy included a link to the article that she was talking about, the news story. Okay, I'm all caught up in chat now.
And I do think it's been a wonderful conversation, and it's been so nice to have a group of people who have been thinking about a lot of these same things to talk with. I am aware of the time. I think that we are at our time. I think we had 50 minutes, so we probably should start to wrap it up. Maybe there's, I see there's one more thing in the chat. Maybe we could address that, Kara, and then we could conclude.
Okay. Shivam says, I come from mathematics and there is not much discussion about inclusivity, partially due to lack of usage of language in the subject, but there are so many other ways, as you shared, that can be switched to emphasize inclusion. Great talk. And Erica says, really nice to see a model of how to shift from thinking about this to doing. And Karen said, great talk, lots of great ideas.
Thanks, folks.
And Chad reflects the similar sentiments. Thank you for a great presentation, all the tools, ideas for increasing inclusiveness.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thanks,
yeah, go
everyone.
ahead. Yeah, thanks for coming. Enjoy the rest of the conference. We'll see you, I'm sure we'll see you in the participant list.
Yeah, and feel free to reach out to us if you want to talk about this further, have any questions. Oh, Carolyn, you can access it if you click on the session. It'll give you like a link to just like a general page that has information about our session, and then there's in that there's a link to our Google document that has all of the resources.